The Jump, a long series for some of you out there. Sometimes you want to yell at everyone around you because life is so hard. You are aware of the individuals I refer to. You wake up and realize that you've used the snooze button too many times, which is why you're running late. The remainder of the day is an uphill battle when you dash out the door. That's how my day began, and by the time it was over, it had gotten much worse. It had been just less than 5 years since Jillian and I were wed. We hit it off immediately away when we met through friends at a barbecue. Jillian was coming off a difficult separation with her long-term boyfriend, according to the tale I heard from her and her friends. They believed I was a reasonably good-looking single guy who could support her. I was hesitant at first. I had no desire to be the guy on the rebound. But after a few months, our mutual acquaintances continued to introduce us, and we became friends. A little more than 2 years after we first met, I asked Jillian to marry me. After 6 months, I worked up the courage to ask her out. I was thrilled when she said yes at the time, and up until now, I would have believed that I could sell Jillian's breath since I was so in love with her. As I was polishing my shoes for our evening out, Jillian said, "Greg, should I wear the black or the beige heels tonight?" That's me, Gregory Other, the hardworking, nice person who owns his own accounting practice, and now I feel like the biggest liar the world has ever seen. "You look good in both," I said to her. Jillian loved to dress up, and she looked fantastic when she did it right. But the black heels accentuate your calves a lot more. They will turn a lot more heads. But generally speaking, she lacked style sense. She was simply unable to combine different colors, styles, and shapes. One of my favorite things about her was that I got to make her look nice while she asked for guidance all the time. It had been a difficult day at work, aside from a late start. We were working with a sizable multinational company on a few audits. There were delays and inaccurate information being provided. While most of it was due to simple errors, some of the most recent spreadsheets under evaluation looked away. Correlating ledgers and sifting through data was what my team and I did all day. Some of the bizarre and amazing things managers were attempting to get through were starting to irritate us. This includes going to hookers and, occasionally, strip clubs. We also found it difficult when individuals attempted to have cocaine approved as a reasonable business expense. I was worn out and angry after this audit, especially since this Friday was full of spreadsheet difficulties. To exacerbate the situation, Jillian had been ecstatic about the reunion this evening for the whole week. She never seemed to notice how tired I was, which annoyed me all week. When I was going through a difficult week like this one in the past, Jillian would have listened to me, showing empathy and, most of the time, a little love to cheer me up. But for the first time since we met, she seemed so preoccupied with the reunion this week that I felt like a bother to her. Though I wouldn't say I enjoyed the feeling, she was my wife, and regardless of my own feelings, I tried to be glad for her when she was happy. It was her high school year reunion tonight. It was organized by a few students in the class rather than being an official school-hosted event. For their graduating class and their partners, they had first rented a restaurant, and then the exclusive section of a club. Last year, I went with Jillian, and I must confess, once I presented myself as Jillian's husband, I received a few funny looks. Still, I had a great time. I wasn't really looking forward to it this year. It had been an awful week, as I mentioned. But because of my wife's excitement and as a possible diversion from my difficult audit week, I took a shower, shaved, put on my nicest suit, styled my hair, and worked to get over the week so that I could be my wife's cheerful sidekick. I sensed there was a problem with the restaurant as soon as we walked in. Several of the girls from Jillian's class quickly swept her away, leaving me standing pretty much by myself. I was mostly left out of the conversation at dinner, save from the odd query, as we were seated next to our friends Lena and Mark, who had introduced us. While Jillian continued to behave like her usual cheerful, bubbly self, I noticed that she was not speaking to me very often and that other people, including Mark and Lena, were giving me unsettling glances. Lena and Jillian went to the bathroom as supper was coming to an end, and they stayed there for a while. Everyone was splitting up at the same time to go to the club for more dancing and drinks. My companion approached Mark warily after a while, asking him, "What's going on, Mark?" Jillian and Lena had not returned. Mark looked surprised when I tapped him on the shoulder. "Sorry, Greg. I'm not sure what you mean." I glared at him, "Mark, I swear," and stopped when I noticed Lena was coming back, but my wife wasn't with her. Trying to evade my stare, she grasped her husband's hand and said, "Come on, Mark." "Lena, where's Jillian?" I inquired, my voice becoming more concerned. She hesitated for a second before turning to look at Mark. They exchanged a look, and she then briefly glanced at the artificial plants scattered about the restaurant. She was clearly attempting to find a way to tell me something she didn't want to. "I'm sorry, Gregory. We got caught up with a group and she is catching a lift to the club with them." Without telling me, her husband. I questioned, my voice taking on a hint of rage. "Lena, Mark, what aren't you telling me?" I responded. They were unable to look me in the eye. I stormed out of the restaurant, got into my car, and went to the club where everyone was meeting, without saying another word. Even though the drive took 10 minutes, I arrived in 5. I saw it as soon as I went in the door. My wife Jillian informed me that this was not the first time she had experienced this while dancing with a man whose hands were all over her. I observed my life slipping away from me. As I stood right inside the club entrance, I noticed that people from the reunion were starting to flow in around me. No one said anything, but I could feel their sympathetic glances. I don't know how long I watched, but I was there and they didn't seem to notice me. I stood there until I felt a hand come up to my shoulder, which startled me and caused me to spin so quickly that I almost struck Lena in the face. Lena stated bluntly, "It's Jillian's first love, Troy." However, it was unclear whether she was pleased, upset, furious, or disappointed. They pretty much grew up together, in the same preschool, best friends through primary school, and they dated all the way through high school. We all thought they would be together forever until he got a scholarship to a university in the States and they broke up. Now that I knew the guy's name and a good deal about his background, I could even say that I had helped Jillian get over a lot of the rejection she experienced when he departed. I mumbled, "They don't look very broken up to me." Lena said to me, emotionlessly, "He's been back for a few months now, transferred in with the company he works for." Troy and Jillian were still dancing as I turned back to face the dance floor. Mark was standing behind the two of us while Lena continued to chat and stare at them. The first hint of emotion in her voice was when she said, "They are meant to be together, Greg." It sounded like a doctor informing me I had terminal cancer. I remained silent. As Lena tried to explain, my fists began to clench as the song stopped. I mean, Jillian was so devastated when they broke up. She loved him so much, we never thought that she would meet anyone else. But then you met and it came together, she said. Troy leaned in, kissed my wife on the face, and we watched. My palm's blood was drawn by my fingernails. It was almost as if the connection between them shattered when the first drop of blood dropped from my palm and touched the ground. Jillian's gaze swept across the patrons entering the club before meeting mine. She released Troy with a handshake and came over to face me. I never saw Mark and Lena turn to leave. She approached me casually, as if we had never met before. With no welcome, Jillian told me, "Troy was my first love, Greg. We gave each other our virginities." She proceeded as though I would follow. I became still like a statue. When he moved for his scholarship, we always said that we would reconnect when he moved home. My snarky comment, "I guess he moved home and you reconnected," was my first since leaving the restaurant. "Don't be like that," Jillian told me. "I get that this is going to be hard for you, but Troy and I are meant to be together. You married me, Jillian." She never averted her eyes, so I'll give her points for bravery. "I'm sorry, Greg, honestly, but we're going to have to get a divorce. Troy and I, specifically, plan to tie the knot and start a family. And for the last few years, I was simply your cozy stand-in." What the heck happened to me? A few people were staring at us, and the bouncers were observing us but not moving. I was on the verge of yelling now, when I noticed the lover guy approaching us. "Greg, you were never," she said. "Look, Greg, I do love you, it's just you're not Troy. The love that you and I share is nothing compared to what Troy and I have." With a frown on his face, I observed Troy take the final dozen steps towards us and wrap his arm around Jillian. "Are you, I presume, Greg?" With a phony look of worry on his face, he questioned. "That's Gregory to you," I shot back, turning angry. He gave a nod. "Okay, hostility, I get that," he replied. "You're upset because I'm taking your wife. She's going to divorce you and we've been sleeping together since I got back." Troy didn't know me, so immediately he realized what he'd said. He shoved Jillian behind him, striking a protective position. He paused, the look on my face showing I had no idea. Jillian went white as a sheet as he said it, must have been hoping it wouldn't come out. "Look, Gregory, I'm sorry you found out this way, but maybe it's for the best," he remarked in an attempt to appear accommodative. "Jillian informs me that you have been a wonderful husband and the friend I was unable to be while I was abroad. We have a lot of mutual friends, so it would be nice if we could all become friends." I turned back to Troy and stated, "Not for long," keeping my eyes fixed on Jillian for a brief while before speaking before he could respond. "So let me get this right," I said, forcing every ounce of emotion out of my voice. My rage was building, but I suppressed it for the time being. Suddenly, the music stopped, and my voice was audible from across the room. Clearly, the little show had everyone's attention because everyone turned to watch us, including the DJ who never started the next song. "You two play like bunnies through school, believing you had true love, but suddenly you break up because Troy moves abroad." They nod hesitantly, and you can hear a pin drop. However, while Jillian is grieving, she meets me, reportedly falls in love, and marries me while we are happy for several years. Then, when Romeo returns to the nation and you two begin acting like puppies behind my back once more, genuine love strikes again. From the stares I received all night, it's obvious that our friends are aware of it. It all comes to this, in the most embarrassing way imaginable. My so-called best buddy tears my heart out and holds it up for everyone to see. Jillian began, "Greg, it wasn't supposed to be. That wasn't expected to be that at all. You've been bouncing around all week, but you've been ignoring me," I shouted back, but no one moved. "You insisted that we go tonight even though I had a difficult week, yet you leave me as soon as we enter. In order for me to discover you here sleeping someone, you even humiliate me in front of our fictitious friends and walk out of the restaurant without even saying hello." Troy tried to say, "Hey," but I gave him a frown. "Don't say a word, Romeo." Troy said, "Look, Greg," attempting to take charge of the discussion. "I get it, there are a lot of emotions flying around right now. But Jillian and I are destined to be together. We're sorry you're hurt and you found out we've been sleeping together, but Jillian loves me and we're going to get married. Naturally, you and she are going to need to divorce. Naturally, I said in a flat tone. Look, Greg, Jillian murmured. I'm sorry, but we figured this was the best way. It would be a quick rip of the band-aid. We know it will hurt, but it's best for everyone. She hesitated, attempting to gauge my emotional state. I had always been open to her, even though for the past few years she had been both my wife and best friend. She had never thought of me as being closed off. Jillian, it's Gregory, not Greg. She continued, look, Gregory, I know this is hurting right now, but it's for the best. We're all still young, you'll find someone else. My gaze quivered, that tiny flicker of feeling making her appear much more paler. The remainder of the room is still silent. It seems that Troy noticed, as he cleared his throat. Look, Gregory, I know this is a lot to take, but I think it's best you leave. Everyone here knows Jillian and I are supposed to be together, and I, unfortunately, think you'd be a third wheel. I grinned again, and this time, half the room gave me a suspicious glance. On that, we agree. He grinned in return, figuring I could understand. Good, well, as it's out in the open now, Jillian and I will keep away from your place over the weekend and even next week so you can move out. Move out? Well, it's Jillian's house too, Troy swallowed. I responded, my eyes narrowing. I see. Greg. Ori, said my soon-to-be ex-wife, finding it difficult to go back to using my full name after all this time. We thought it would be easier for you to move out. The house is perfect for Troy and me to have children in, and we figure it's too large for you, so we would sort something out. I see, I repeated, sounding like a snake about to hiss in the final phrase. Nobody said anything for a while, and when the DJ saw that there wouldn't be a fight, he decided it would be a good idea to start the music. Nobody started dancing as soon as the music began. All eyes in the room continued to watch to see what would happen. Pushing out his hand, Troy spoke loudly above the music. I'm sorry, Gregory, but that's how it is. I know you might not think so right now, but no hard feelings. He swiftly withdrew his hand as I glanced down at it and then back up at his gaze. He would have witnessed me pushing the severed limb up a specific orifice after severing that hand with the closest sharp object if he could have peered into my head. I turned and walked outside after deciding it was time to go. The two bouncers on the door each opened aside and stepped out in front of me, but no one stopped me. The sound from inside subsided when the door shut. You okay, man? Inquired one of the guys. They had seen what had occurred as well. No, not really, but that's, I suppose, anyone that just had that handed to them. I went on. You know, remarked the other bouncer, if you wanted to go back and give that guy a couple of hits, we could wait a few minutes before pulling you off. I laughed for the first time that day, and both bouncers smiled. While tempting, no, I don't need a night in the watch house. They both agreed. Still, stated the first bouncer. Look, I've seen some crap over the years working clubs, but that is one of the coldest and underhanded ways to break up a marriage I have ever seen. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Shrugging off the sympathy, I waved it off. Don't worry about it. I think I'll just go home, I responded. The second bouncer said, and change the locks. Mate, don't let the woman back into the house until you have to. Grinning, I lifted an eyebrow. After another minute of conversation and handshakes, I left to go to my car and home. I visited a Bunnings warehouse on my way home. It was late and they were about to close in an hour, but I was able to get what I wanted right away. There are several moving boxes, new deadbolts and locks, and packing tape. After I got home, I finished putting the boxes together and replacing the locks. After a few hours, I had multiple boxes filled with Jillian's possessions before the adrenaline of being completely abandoned by my wife and alleged friends overcame me and forced me to take a seat. I filled a Kraken with Coca-Cola and turned on my laptop. I opened our bank account and began doing the typical things that one does after their spouse deceives them. After blocking our shared credit cards, I canceled them. After opening a new account, I moved half of our holiday and general savings funds to it. I had several $100s in cash, so I could wait out the few days it would take for everything to clear. I opened our legal folder after getting a second wind from the rum and sugar in the Coke. It contained several legal documents, such as those pertaining to the house, 2 investment properties we had purchased, and the prenuptial agreement we had drafted prior to marriage. I understand what you're thinking. It contains a provision about adultery. No, you would be incorrect in that regard. The prenuptial agreement largely shielded the assets I had in my enterprises. You see, I had just begun my accounting business when we first dated and got married. But when I first started the company, I had some wise mentors who helped me set up the businesses that backed my practice in my name alone. Jillian and I also signed a prenuptial agreement that said my business, other accounts, and all other subsidiaries were not subject to any kind of separation. In retrospect, I'm positive Jillian readily consented because she was aware that eventually she would probably turn on me for her partner. However, she was unaware of the full expense of it. I slept for a couple of hours that night despite being restless, and then I woke up and decided to go out to breakfast. After some driving about, I came into a fantastic Asian fusion restaurant that combined traditional Asian and Australian cuisine to create delectable breakfast dishes that I really appreciated. I wrote a letter to a buddy at a law firm my company deals with, explaining the situation and preparing for the divorce process, while I was eating and sipping an extra strong coffee. Within 30 minutes, I received a call from someone who was shocked, but I told Mike everything that had happened. He informed me that he would be prepared to file on Monday morning and would put me in touch with a helpful person in his firm. He expressed his regret to me, of course. I was at the cafe for an additional hour. Other than using my laptop to browse the internet and feeling a little sorry for myself, I had no idea what I was doing. When I arrived home, Mark and Lena had already exited their vehicle while I had parked on the curb. "Greg, let's get started," Lena said. She halted before she could go any farther when I raised my hand. I said, "Gregory." Again, Lena said, "Sorry. My name is Gregory. Only my friends get to call me Greg," I replied bluntly. "Listen, bud," Mark began, attempting to sound accommodative. "We're sorry for how last night went down. That is not how." Like his wife, he halted when I raised my hand again. For a minute, I fixed my gaze on a tree across the street. It was a bigger tree that had just experienced a storm that tore off one of its limbs. The limb missed the home and fell onto a carport. I believed that the tree losing a branch was a fitting metaphor for how I was feeling after giving it some thought. It felt like I had my arm severed when Jillian left. A minute later, I turned to face Mark and Lena again, tears streaming down my cheeks, fury burning brightly in my eyes. "Don't you dare, Mark. Don't you dare make excuses," I yelled. "You've known that woman has been cheating on me behind my back for months and you say nothing." Lena began to say, "But Gregory, it's true." I interrupted her, "Love," feeling the warm tears still running down my cheeks. "Pardon me, the sanctimonious BS woman. True love is compassionate. It cares about what happens to those around them, not abandoning or humiliating them without warning and then rubbing it in their faces in front of a crowd. True love doesn't stab others in the back to get what it wants." I felt that my relationship with Jillian was genuine love. I never questioned her. I would have given her anything because I loved her so much and I worshipped the ground she walked on. "I know," Lena remarked, her eyes welling with sorrow. "But Jillian and Troy quit." With a single word, my fury erupted and my tears vanished in an instant. "Stop," I urged more softly. "Lena, please stop talking about Jillian and Troy. I'm done listening to them talk about how much they adore each other and how their union is destiny. I have merely been living a lie for the last few years of my life." Lena, 7 years. Years of supporting her through her struggles with self-identity and her feelings that Troy had abandoned her. Years of planning a family, years of exhorting her to reach new heights, years of excruciating monthly period pain. Not to mention the many years of discussing getting older together. Stressing the word friend, I continued, "I've wasted years of nothing because I was only ever a plan B. But tell me why. Why does the guy get to waltz back in after leaving her while I've spent years investing in someone I loved without reservation? They gave me a child's ignorance when they gazed at me." I went on, the agony and pain leaving me. "He gets all of my hard work. He gets the woman I built up when he abandoned her. He gets all her friends that betrayed me before she has true love. They had the grace to appear embarrassed, at least in the last remark." I yelled at them, "Well, screw that. She now gets what she deserves, and both of you were part of that, so get the hell off my property." "Greg," declared Mark. I looked at him, "Look, I get it. This is not what any of us thought would happen. We honestly thought Jillian and you would be happy forever. We thought you would have kids, but Troy came back, and we can all see how much they love each other. We know it sucks, but they deserve to be happy." I questioned them, "And what about me and my happiness? What do I deserve?" They were both at a loss for words. I exhaled. "I tell you what, I deserve a faithful wife and watchful friends, but I get none of them, so screw you and don't feel sorry for me. It doesn't seem like any of you, not even the woman, care for me if it gets in the way of their relationship. Thus, if I seem resentful, it's because I am. But put yourself in my position," I added, glancing at Lena. "Mark, you'll understand my feelings when Lena discovers her true love and departs from you for him." Lena was silenced when Mark's arm clamped down on hers, saying, "But Mark is my..." "Okay, Gregory. You've stated your case, and you refuse to consider alternative viewpoints," Mark remarked. "Is there anything we can do as a farewell gesture before we depart?" After giving it some thought, I turned to face the minivan they had parked in the driveway. "Yes, wait here." I literally flung out numerous boxes filled with Jillian's clothes, makeup, and personal items over the course of the next few minutes. I piled the boxes in front of them and heard a few fragile things break, making them cringe, but they said nothing. I was thinking of just leaving them in the driveway, but as you're here, you can just take them to the girls' new home wherever their love nest is. I said, "But Jillian said she wanted the house and you were going to move." Lena replied. She was silenced before she could say anything more by my laughter. "It's not her residence. She is not the owner of it. But then again, I don't own it either. She will thus discover that she is extremely unlucky. Inform the whore that she is not required to return here. Those crates hold everything that belongs to her. Additionally, let her know that my lawyer will mail the divorce papers to her on Monday. Whatever is left belongs to her because I have already deleted everything she owned and removed myself from the accounts." Lena began, "You're not even," and then stopped. "What?" I inquired, to battle. "No way, no way. She has been lying to me about her allegiance for a number of years, is in love with him, and has been cheating on me. No, I'll give it to her when it comes. Not a bit more, not a bit less. There was not much more to say, so I watched them load up most of the boxes into their van and head off. I imagine they were a little upset, realizing they had betrayed my friendship by helping Jillian, but if they were sorry, I wasn't there to witness it. I punched more holes in the hallway walls, tore off most of the kitchen cabinet doors, and even put a few large dents in the fridge. That night, I got wasted, sobbing like a baby, got angry, and punched my fist through a wall, smashing a vase that Jillian and I bought on vacation for our first wedding anniversary. I was furious at being left behind by my wife and friends, and I completely destroyed the lounge room. I woke up the next morning extremely inebriated, with a splitting headache, bloody knuckles, possibly broken hands, and scrapes all over my arms. I hastily bandaged my hands and arms, realizing that I would have to see a doctor to get things checked out. Not a single piece of furniture had spared my anger, so I inspected the living area, noticing that I would have to replace pretty much everything. Along the corridor, ragged holes were spread irregularly as I vented my frustrations on the gullible walls. I winced as I looked at the 3 big dents in the fridge, a faint memory of how, back then, throwing punches at the sheet metal door felt so good. There were cupboard doors all over the floor, appliances leaning in places they would never work properly. After discovering some orange juice in the dented fridge that had only expired a few days before, I took a big drink and took a couple of Panadols. After half an hour, the room started to pulse less and I moved into the lounge room, where I sat on the floor between broken chairs and stared at the cracked TV. The rest of the day was a blur. I went to the doctor, had my arms examined, and was told that both of my hands had hairline fractures that would require immobilization until they healed. I received messages from several people, including Mark and Lena, but I never replied. That evening, I went to bed without knowing if I had done anything during the day other than watch TV and go to the doctor. On Monday, the following day, I arrived at the office at my regular time, went through my Friday's emails and any that had come in over the weekend, and prepared for a team meeting at 9 a.m. to discuss the week's activities. I worked with a group of 15 people, and we did a good job working together most of the time. At approximately 8:30, my office administrator, Colleen, an older woman in her 50s, entered the room, gave me a quick glance, pulled out a chair, and took a seat. That awful weekend, you think? As she observed the ties covering my hands and arms, she inquired. In the 3 years we'd worked together, I'd never spoken harshly to her, so when I gave her a glare, she swallowed. Gregory, I'm sorry, it must have been bad. What happened? She inquired. I let out a sigh, looked at my computer for a while, then lifted my hands from the keyboard and faced my office administrator. I said in a very flat voice, Jillian left me for her true love. OMG. No, you're making this up. Seriously, Gregory, don't, Colin interrupted. I shook my head and held up my bandaged hands, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I told her, it's true, that casual class reunion we had Friday night. Mark and Lena seemed to be among her peers who were aware that it would happen. Everyone was aware that Jillian and Loverboy had been scheming me for some months. They all just decided to use Friday night as an opportunity to surprise me. That's when I broke down and started crying, and Colleen came around the desk to hug me for the first time since we met, and I could feel her own tears start to fall on my shoulders. I told her how I went to the doctor yesterday to get my hands bandaged while I nursed the worst hangover of my life. I told her how on set I got drunk and in a violent frenzy, destroyed most of the furniture in the house, leaving holes in the walls of at least half the house. We'd both done our best to blot our eyes by the time our morning stand-up rolled around, and Colin was on time to usher everyone into our large conference room, where I entered and took a seat. I hope everyone had a good weekend, I replied, drawing several nods from others in the room, but they were all attempting to avoid staring at my bandages. I started to say, this week, but Colleen stopped us, raising her hand this time. I apologized to Gregory, but I have to end this. Colin said, you can't pretend like everything is normal after what happened to you this past weekend. I hesitated for a second before nodding. Colleen looked at me again, and I could tell by her expression that she wanted to include everyone in the conversation, at least about the essentials. After giving it some thought, I gave my permission by nodding, understanding that she would only divulge information that would be useful. Everyone, Gregory was duped by his wife and several pals this past weekend. He had been the victim of Jillian's indiscretions for a few months, and she chose to end their relationship in the most vile and heartless ways imaginable, by making fun of him in front of a gathering of individuals, some of whom were friends. Colleen paused to give that some thought before focusing on a single-seater who was practically hidden on the other side of the table. Isn't that right, James? Colleen inquired. One of our CPAS was James Coulson. He was Jillian's classmate as well. It dawned on me that he and his spouse had been present on Friday evening, seeing the events transpire. James had not spoken to anyone since entering the workplace, but he made an effort to blend in as much as possible when he noticed me. Colleen paled when he began to speak. Everybody in the room turned to look at him as she called him out, and he attempted to sink into the seat he was in. Well, he murmured. James, was Colleen's sharp, grandmotherly reply. Were you or were you not there on Friday night? James attempted to respond, yes, but. And did you, or did you not know that your employer's wife was having an affair with someone from your class? Firmly, Colleen inquired. James took a swallow. Be honest, James. With a downward glance at the table in front of him, James said, I did. Very quietly, he said. Nobody said anything for a brief while. There was a tangible energy in the room. I would have assumed that everyone in the room had each other's backs up until tonight. There was an undercurrent of anger directed towards James as nearly everyone in the room bristled. Colin said, all right then, James, a short while later. I believe you should leave the room right now. I believe you should consider your future with this company because you will be fired for cause if we discover that you helped Jillian in any way during the events of this past weekend. Do you get it? After swallowing once more, he got up. I understand, and made an effort to leave the room as discreetly as possible. Nobody spoke up. James was in the room on Friday, but mostly I had forgotten that. I barely noticed anyone as this was all going on, except in the main characters who were destroying my life. I gave a throat clearing. I said, everyone, attempting to get us back to the present. I'm not going to lie, my personal life sucks, and you can all guess that my weekend was not enjoyable. I made a point by raising my hands. However, every one of us has a job to complete and clients to attend to. I'm just going to put my trust in you all to look out for one another this week, and let Colleen know if you need anything in particular. I will be present, but I will be a mess if we are all being honest about what is going on. So please be patient with me. As everyone in the room expressed their condolences and words of support, I nearly started crying once more. Finally, I uttered those words. It pains me to say this, but don't hang James just yet. I understand your anger, and James seems like a convenient scapegoat. However, before we carry out one of our own, let's take some time to learn the whole tale. I got a lot of mumbles, but everybody was in agreement. I handed off the rest of the meeting to Colleen. I ended the meeting and went back to my office, where I just stared out the window. Colleen knocked after a few minutes. As I turned to face the entryway, I noticed her waiting there with a very reprimanded James just behind her. I opened the door for them, and James shut it properly behind him before settling into the chair Colleen indicated. Gregory, I think you and James should talk, she stated bluntly. James took a seat across from me at my desk, and I nodded as I settled back into my chair. I continued to gaze out of my office window, my thoughts still racing with various feelings. I could have used a drink even though it wasn't yet 10 in the morning. James gave a throat clearing. When I looked up at him, he gave me a downcast face. With a tone of accusation, I said, so, Gregory, he said, pausing briefly before laughing. Something funny. With a tinge of irritation behind her normally composed demeanor, Colleen asked. James gave me a sad, grief-filled grin, but it was an unhappy smile. James bemoaned, no, there is nothing funny about this whole situation. In addition to my wife yelling at me nonstop yesterday, my boss has been betrayed, our class is divided, and I could soon lose my job. Thus, no, nothing is funny, but I either cry or laugh gallows humor. I gave the man a hesitant smile in return. James was always someone I liked since he worked hard, and I assumed he would be around forever until Colleen brought him up to me this morning. James, why don't you start from the top? I grinned back. Trying to appear casual and encouraging, I asked. He sat back in his chair with an uneasy expression and nodded. I suppose you have heard too many times now about how perfect Jillian and Troy were together in high school. I replied with a nod. In the past few days, I have heard nothing else but. I answered. I was always a math nerd in high school. I wasn't bullied, but I wasn't part of the popular crowd either, he affirmed. But we all watched Troy and Jillian. They were our year's monarch and queen. James turned to watch my response. Receiving none, he went on. When our final year was winding up and university placements were coming out, we all thought they would be going together, but the entire school was shocked when Troy announced he would be heading overseas without Jillian. He hesitated once more. I gave a nod. I waved for him to continue without saying anything because I understood part of this narrative. Well, the week before school ended, they called it quits. Troy attended several parties, but Jillian never did. I visited Jillian twice during the period between finishing school and going to university. She appeared depressed and distant. Then, several months later, I learned from another source that Troy was having a great time in the United States. Thanks to his family, he was awarded a full scholarship, and there were rumors that he was already dating. I gave another nod. While we were still getting to know one another throughout the getting to know you phase of our relationship, Jillian also told me this. In the early days, she had cried into my shoulder a few times, telling me how devastated she was that Troy would leave her and start dating someone else. I invited Jillian out on a date, and we kissed for the first time after one of these chats. After that, Troy began to fade into Jillian's recollection. That is, until lately. James went on, pulling me from the recollection. Well, I headed off to university myself, got my degree, met and married Sherry, and felt fortunate to land a role here. His smile had a hint of regret. I was surprised when I learned that you had married Jillian, said James. To be honest, I was relieved to see that she was content with you. I mean, she was devastated by Troy's departure. I was happy at the time to learn that she had found a decent man who had assisted her in getting back on her feet. James was buried in his own thoughts for a time, so I interrupted. So when did you learn about Troy and Jillian's affair? I questioned, startled by the tone of my voice. James seemed a little amused by it as well, judging by the way he glanced at me. About an hour before Jillian and yourself turned up for dinner. He spoke in a forlorn manner. A couple of the students were chatting. Later that evening, I heard that Jillian was leaving you for Troy, and I noticed everyone's shocked expressions. I shot James a curious glance. He let out a sigh. Just a small group of people were aware of anything prior to the dinner. However, word went out to the entire class that Jillian and Troy were meant to be together. Sherry and I were brought aside by Mark and Lena, who informed us that although they were sorry for you, Jillian had made her decision and you were simply not going to be a part of her future. Mark reminded me that I was employed by you as I began to object. He was very clear in telling me that I would regret saying anything to you. If I couldn't keep my mouth shut, he indicated it was best for Sherry and me to go. I gave James a peek. The man remembered the conversation with genuine pain in his eyes. He had an extremely embarrassed flush creeping up his neck, and his watery eyes astonished me even more. Gregory, I apologize, we were unable to remain for supper. It was Sherry's wish for us too. She desired for us to support you. However, Mark and a few of the other guys essentially told us to go after walking us out. I began to say, James, since I was feeling sorry for him. To halt me, he raised his palm. I apologize, but I have to get done. I kept my word to Sherry. I gave another nod. I have to say, I was taken aback, he said. I was a loose end and your wife was about to betray you, so I had just been kicked out of my class reunion. Sherry and I headed directly to the club because, despite our anger, we had no idea what to do. Once more, we both felt that we should be there for you. What transpired, we were present, but we were up the back by the time you got there. It wasn't until Jillian informed you that a few of the guys prevented us from reaching you. They released us a few minutes after you left. Sherry and I both hurried after you, but you had already left by the time we arrived. I believe we must have stood in front of the club for almost 30 minutes, dumbfounded but unsure of what to do. Ultimately, Sherry persuaded me to return inside and investigate the situation. James took a moment to consider how much more to tell me while glancing at me. He swallowed when I nodded my head at him one more. Just over half the class considered Sherry and I to be persona non grata when we returned. After realizing that I was employed by you, the other half became enraged and kind of surrounded us, keeping us company for the remainder of the evening. Additionally, I began, but I was unable to complete it. James told me, swallowing, they danced and drank without a care in the world, even though I could tell his mouth was dry. Gregory, I apologize, but it seemed like you were unimportant to them. This had been prepared for months, based on the little bits of discourse that made their way back to us. The rumors that Jillian and Troy intended to tie the knot as soon as possible made the situation worse. James then turned to face the earth. Tightly clasped in his lap were his hands. We had a restless night at home. Troy and Jillian's actions revolted us both, but yesterday, Sherry and I ended up arguing over everything. Drawing a piece of paper out of his notebook, James continued, in the end, this leads us to this morning and this, setting it on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked, rapidly reading the text on the paper. Dejected, my resignation, he murmured. It was dated and signed yesterday, as I noticed. With James, I began. Not me, Gregory, he answered. Even though you have been an incredible boss and, dare I say it, friend, what they did to you is wrong, and I was powerless to help. More than that is what you deserve. Sherry and I decide that every time you look at me, it would be better for me to step down than for you to remember what happened to you on Friday night. We remained silent for a while. I giggled as I took another look at his resignation. For the first time, I felt something other than grief and rage, well, more like a bark than a laugh. James and Colleen gave me a look. I tore the page in two, pinching it in the middle along the long edge. Your resignation is rejected, I responded. I noticed Colleen smiling behind us. James had a surprised expression. He was attempting to say, but Gregory, what? Why? To begin with, James, my friends refer to me as Greg. I want you to consider me a friend in light of what you just told me. You made an effort to warn me and to assist, but you were unsuccessful. They were prepared for your arrival. However, you are here, sacrificing yourself for me because you care about me. Nothing is a buddy if that's not the case. I said, James, I am hurt beyond comprehension. I feel a burning anger inside of me that demands justice, and I am also depressed. I am not blind, though. From what you just said, it appears that you are also upset. Sherry and I thought it best, James said with a nod. It's true, I answered. And that's one of the reasons I want Sherry and yourself to stay with us. We spoke for the next 30 minutes. Eventually, James, Colleen, and I left my office and called everyone back into the meeting room. I mentioned that James had been caught off guard by the two cheaters almost as much as I had been and had been kicked out of his own reunion. I described what had happened, what I wanted everyone to do, and the situation. Any resentment towards James vanished, and by the time we were all leaving, everyone's faces were sporting a few sly smiles. I worked in the office much of the rest of the week, but more often than not, I was getting the wheels of my divorce spinning rather than giving advice to my team about what they should be doing. I never did mail the divorce. Jillian was served by me at work. It made no difference because in Australian divorces, adultery is not a determining factor. Nevertheless, I ensured that the admission of adultery was prominently shown on the court filings by my attorneys, Mike and his partner Sally. Jillian texted and called me a few times after she received the documents. I didn't delete them, but I quickly ignored them. I allowed the messages to accumulate on my phone because I assumed they were angry messages. I occupied myself with things like insurance, bank account management, asset listings, and validating canceled cards. My staff went through all of my legal documents to make sure they were current and that Jillian wasn't able to touch anything. On Tuesday night, Colleen made it a point to come over for dinner and was repeatedly astounded by the extent of the damage done to my house. She may have left a trail for Hansel and Gretel to follow with her tears as she moved from room to room. Colleen contacted my insurance company on Wednesday morning to set up a damage assessment. She organized assessors and cleaning crews for my house by Friday. I have no idea how she did it. The next week would be when it all would begin. By Friday night, I was mentally and physically worn out. However, I was still having trouble sleeping, so on Saturday morning, since I had the day off, I got up early and went for a run. After jogging home a few hours later, I had run down to our local stores and sat at a cafe enjoying coffee and a croissant. I was shocked to see Jillian waiting for me on the front steps when I returned to the house. She had left me on Friday, and I hadn't seen her since. She was wearing sneakers, jeans, and a loose-fitting top. However, the shoes and shirt didn't go together. It seemed that the boyfriend didn't contribute to her appearance. I pulled out my headphones and paused about halfway up the driveway, a thin film of sweat covering my body. Blue Stolly's Anti-Sleep blasted till I turned off the loud music. Check it out if you're ever looking for some music to help you become angry. Neither of us said anything for a brief while. Jillian began, "Greg, it's good to see you." She was interrupted mid-sentence when I spat a ball of phlegm out of my mouth into the grass. "What?" She paused before I could answer. "You're surprised that I'm looking after myself after my cheating, or if a wife betrayed me in front of an entire group of people. Afraid that I would have killed myself because you tore my heart out with no warning. Worried I might be laying in a puddle of my own vomit, so drunk because you screwed me over so badly that I couldn't function." I gave her a fierce look, and Jillian gracefully retreated a step and turned somewhat pale. "It wasn't like that, Greg. I never meant to." I was about to yell at her, "Hurt me," and cut her off from her regular diversionary monologue. She remained motionless for a moment before simply nodding her head. "Like I believe that, Jillian, you purposely, and I do mean purposely, lined everything up to very specifically tell me you were leaving me in front of people I thought were friends. You purposely set out to destroy me." Her gaze shifted to her feet. In a hushed voice, she said, "Greg, that wasn't my idea to do it that way. Mark and Troy thought that if we did it that way you wouldn't try to fight it." I laughed and flung back my head. "You must be kidding," I remarked sourly as I got comfortable. "I mean, we've known each other for years, would have been married 5 years soon, and you thought when I found you had been running around on me or that you were going to leave me that I would try to fight for you." Jillian reddened. "But," I spit in her face, "you gave up any demand for my attention or defense the moment you spread your legs for that guy. It just took a while for me to find out. However, now it's out in the open, you can screw off." With some fury beginning to seep into her voice, Jillian shot back, "Greg, that's no way to talk to me. I mean, I am still your wife." "Hi," I said as I walked by her and back up the drive to the front door. After removing my keys, I opened the door. Jillian tried to follow me in as I was entering, but I stopped her with a raised hand. Without any fanfare, I told her, "You're not invited in." "But, Greg, it's still my house too," she stammered out. I gave a head shake. "No, it's not. It never was. The house belongs to the trust, and my wage paid a rental fee each month towards the trust." She gave me an incomprehensible look. I shut the door behind her, saying, "Look, Jillian, it's not your house anymore, you don't live here. But wait here, I have a few things for you." I texted my lawyer as soon as I got into my study to let her know Jillian was there. After gathering a few items, I made my way back to the entrance. Jillian remained in that position. She began to say, "Greg, I made the universal gesture of shutting up with my hand. "Firstly, it's Gregory. I told you, only my friends get to call me Greg, and you certainly are not a friend." Jillian took a swallow. "Second," I answered, giving her a tiny binder in return. "And here is a check for your half of our marital assets." Her eyes widened. The impact of the check she unexpectedly held in her palm revealed more to her than the documents we had to go through about the divorce. "Third, I'm told you have something for me." She gave me a confused look for a second before opening her purse, removing a manila envelope, and saying, "I'm sorry, Greg. I mean Gregory." "You'll be," I said to myself. She was standing there as I opened the package and turned to the first few pages. I gazed up at her with a snort. Knowing that I was reading about Jillian's request for 75% of our money and 50% of my business in response to my divorce filing, Jillian flushed. I paged through to the back and found the next paper, a restraining order that would prevent me from entering the house or from intentionally being within 100 meters of Troy or Jillian starting on Monday. Really? I questioned, raising an eyebrow. She was unable to look me in the eyes at that very time. Everyone had gone too far, she knew. Jillian, to be honest, had always followed the herd. She never imagined how much worse it would ache now. I took out my phone and gave my divorce attorney a call. Jillian pawed the earth with her feet, and I just stood there staring at her. On the second ring, Sally, Mike's associate and my current divorce attorney, answered. Hello, Sally. I have Jillian in front of me at my house. She is presenting me with a restraining order that covers not only her and the gentleman staying away from one other, but also my house, where she no longer resides, in addition to her requests in response to the divorce filing. Jillian turned a few shades crimson, obviously hearing the profanity on the other end of the line as I listened to Sally swear like a sailor, and she would handle it and advise me on what to do. So, I began, turning to face Jillian as I hung up. Jillian, how does it feel to be one of the most heinous people on the planet? She remained silent for a while. Greg, it's not like that at all. Ori, Jillian mutely retorted, I persuaded Troy that we ought to grant you until Monday to vacate, in order for us to move in. You can't move in, I chuckled. You don't live here. I reiterated the information. She replied, sounding a little prickly, but you can't be here, as if she were a 5-year-old being told no. Perhaps, and trust me, this disgusting trick will backfire. I shrugged my shoulders. However, that doesn't mean you and the guy can't be here just because I can't. It's probably time for you to go from Jillian now. Though I would be lying, I would wish you luck. How much do you detest me? She glanced at my wrapped hands but did not pose the question. After what you did, do you really have the audacity to ask me that and then serve me with this paperwork? I wasn't sure she wasn't in the running at this time, so I answered to her like she was the dumbest person on the earth. She remained silent and waited. You were my entire universe, Jillian. My best friend was you. I trusted you more than everyone else in the entire world. Then you take that away from me in an instant, treating me like the gum you scrape off your shoe. I find you to be quite annoying now. Tell me, then, oh wise one, when you thought that after taking my life and torturing me, my love wouldn't instantly convert to resentment and loathing for you. After I crossed my bandaged hands across my chest, Jillian's eyes widened at my use of the curse word. See, she had never heard me use it before, and here I was using it in a verbal tirade directed only at her. She fiddled with her hands for a short while before looking up at me. We did spend a lot of wonderful years together, Gregory, you're right. I had hoped, she said after pausing to catch her breath. However, the restraining order is only in effect while the divorce is finalized and matters are resolved. When things calm down, Mark, Lena, myself, and even Troy hope that we may become friends. I growled and let out a fit. Friends. She backed away as my broken arms let go of the envelope and made an expressive movement. You have got to be kidding me. Friends. I screamed. I would drink a liter of gasoline to spit on you and make sure you burned extra crispy if any of you were on fire. I gave the pair that had set Jillian and me up a fierce look before they actually took part in our devastation. I pointed to the idiot who had stolen my wife and said, both of your hands are as dipped in blood and as guilty as this couple over there. He didn't even have the courage to come up the drive and protect her. Greg, trying to seem firm, Lena said. I glared and became angry at her. Lena, you dare not. This is not a place where you can claim moral superiority. You both actively assisted my wife in cheating on me, Lena and Mark, I said, pointing to them. You both helped to arrange that scene in the club to give me the most embarrassment possible. They came to a halt and stood up. I cut Lena off as she opened her mouth. And don't even think of pretending to be my true love. That was your previous attempt. Remember that both of you encouraged me to date and marry this woman and introduced her to me. Then, without giving it a second thought, you two nonchalantly betrayed me. If any of you is an example of what love is all about, then burn the globe to the ground right away since civilization has no chance of recovering. They stared at me, shocked by the spittle that was coming out of my face, and then I stopped and something clicked. Lena, tell me, after spending the entire night at a strip club and coming home smelling like perfume, do you still forgive Mark? I grinned, abandoning the rage in my voice and picking up a patronizing edge. Lena paused, widening her eyes before turning to face Mark. Mark attempted, baby, that's not true. They all turned to stare at me as I chuckled. Well, it's not at all. According to Mark's preferred narrative with the lads, the front room is the only part of the house that is a strip club. You can get a really unique lap dance in the back room for an additional $500, and protection is just 20 more. Mark started to protest, and I watched with joy as Lena sensed the truth. Or so he tells us during a round of golf. I said, putting my hands back over my chest and feeling content with their own suffering. Mark retreated a step, and a moment thereafter, he was sprinting along the road while his spouse pursued him and yelled at him. I glanced at Troy, the man observing in astonishment, before turning my gaze back to Jillian with a smug smile on my face. Greg, I scowled at her when she called my name. I mean, Gregory, you didn't really need to finish that. I said, she said. I leaned in with a sneer, oh don't worry Jillian, and watched as her ears fell back. That is only the opening salvo, I said, sure that a shudder of worry went up her spine as I said her name. Mark still has a ton of secrets to share, and only a fraction of my anger will find its way to Mark and Lena in this tale of sorrow. I save the rest for those who portray true love. I gave her a smile, seeing her tremble in real life as my words finally got through to her self-centered mentality. What do you mean? Inquired Jillian. I answered, shifting the subject and ignoring her comment. Leave now, Jillian. Tell Troy to take you. Run, if possible, take yourself out of this nation, since neither you nor he will enjoy what is about to happen if you don't. Greg, what is the matter with you? The man I adore is where? I asked, not comprehending until it was too late what she had said. He's dead. I said bluntly, you tore my heart and soul from me, and the remaining hole has given birth to something new, something dark, and something that will enjoy what's coming. She was at a loss for words at that point. I took a moment to make a big backward step and slammed the door shut, delivering one of those evil guy chuckles that they always have in movies. 10 minutes later, I looked outside and saw that Jillian, Troy, and the truck were vanished. I wanted to see her broken and repentant, regretting that she had betrayed me, as I sat on the floor crying for what we had once again. I still wanted her to come back and ask for forgiveness, use every cheating cliché, and work her way back into my life. I loathed her and loved her at the same time. Naturally, I knew it wouldn't occur, and even if it did, I would never be able to accept affection from anyone again. The following month was spent with the typical activities, financial disclosures, attorneys, and the who gets what in a divorce. At work, my team came together to support me, and Colleen assisted me in connecting with a psychologist, with whom I now visit twice a week to start processing my emotions. After moving into a temporary apartment, which was actually a good thing because I couldn't be in the house, Colleen worked with the builders and cleanup crews to remove damaged furniture and appliances from the house and then fix the damage. Even though Jillian had said she wanted a clean breakup, she really wanted to fight over a lot of things. She wanted to fight over 15% of our $20,000 across 3 bank accounts, which was our only asset. She also wanted to fight over the house and investment properties. I had already bought the house we were living in when we got married because I had over-leveraged myself for the business. In the years that followed, we concluded that it had been a wise decision, and we also made some investments to buy 2 more properties. She had helped with some of the renovation, but all 3 houses were part of a trust for which neither of us was a direct beneficiary. She attempted to challenge this with attorneys that I assumed her lover had paid for, but to no avail. All the properties were out of her reach, and I did grin that she had lost the opportunity to receive any return on those investments. Subsequently, furniture and jewelry were involved. I obtained confirmation from my lawyer that all her possessions were enclosed in boxes that were sent to her. I included a list of items that were included in the boxes I packed for her, such as shoes, necklaces, and earrings. My final thought was that Jillian had claimed half of my business, saying she felt entitled to half because we had started the company together. Sally angrily went over the prenuptial terms and even had the opportunity to give Jillian a moral lecture about not getting any other accounting. Sally added icing on the cake by somehow getting Jillian to give up both her wedding and engagement rings. In the end, she got $10,000, of which I would say she spent most on lawyers. I wasn't happy, but it did give me some satisfaction that she walked away with so little while I got to keep my houses and my business, which were worth substantially more. Prior to my moving back in, the restraining order was dropped because Jillian had no claim to the house, so I changed the locks and had a security company come by once a week. After the final terms were agreed upon, we had a few months to wait for the divorce to go through. Jillian didn't say much to me, but James and Sherry received a lot of questions from people they were still in contact with from the reunion, so they politely asked everyone to stop bothering. James found out that Jillian and her lover were living in a town apartment that his employer provided. The lease was only for 6 months, after which he would have to pay for it or find another place. After putting 2 and 2 together, it seemed he believed that by dating Jillian, he would have a ready-made home. We didn't do a lot of small business tax, but over the years we had done some favors for friends, so I was surprised when one of those businesses was waiting for me on Tuesday morning. I never thought I would see their faces. The next surprise came in August, just a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, and it was now tax season here in Australia. In Australia, there are a few busy times for accountants throughout the year. For small businesses, August and September are the busiest. Mark was seated across the table from Lena in one of our meeting rooms, her eyes downcast, and she was pleading, "Gregory, come on man, you gotta help me out." From the look on their faces, I could see they were not getting along very well, which I presumed was a result of our most recent meeting. "Why?" I inquired, taking pleasure in their misery. James was seated next to me. Over the previous few years, James and I had handled Mark's import-export company's taxes. It was a complicated arrangement, requiring that the right paperwork be completed and that offsets and revenue reductions be calculated. We were paid well for it, and while Mark could certainly find another job, the cost would be much higher, and it would take several years for another accountant to become familiar with his company. "Are you really going to force me to plead with Greg?" Mark uttered a begging voice. James grinned and said, "Well, begging would be a nice touch but ultimately pointless." I chuckled. "I would like to know why you are here. You all plan to make me look bad, really." While you all cooed and made cutesy noises at Jillian and the guy telling me to get over myself, you made excuses and showed no concern for my sentiments. Well, I have gotten over myself, and I decided that I want nothing to do with any of you. Can you not believe that choice? There was silence for a minute. Lena mutely remarked, "You were right, you know," when no one else spoke. I arched an eyebrow at what she said. "Meaning?" I inquired. Lena glanced at Mark for a brief period, a shadow cast across her face. I was taken aback by her wrath, but it quickly subsided and was replaced by melancholy. Mark said nothing as he cast a glance down at his hands. "You were correct about the back room and the strip club," she sadly stated. My expression must have revealed my amazement. I assumed Mark was simply being a storyteller and exaggerating the narrative when he brags about it. I told Lena what Mark had said because I wanted to hurt them both. I didn't believe it to be true. "Wow, really? So Mark, you were telling the truth?" I queried my old acquaintance, a little incredulously. After giving me a brief glance, he put his head back down and nodded. Lena caught my sight and I raised an eyebrow. She informed James and me, "You were right, Gregory, and not just about Mark's behavior," as Mark lowered his head. "You were accurate in every way. We never gave you any thought since we were so engrossed in the romance that Troy and Jillian were trying to sell us." Lena gave me a shaky head as I turned to respond. I was silent for the first time. "When you first told us about Mark that day, I briefly believed you were just trying to rile us up, but as soon as I saw the expression in his eyes, I realized you were being honest. However, you were unaware of its veracity, were you?" Lena inquired. I snorted and shook my head. "Figures." She stopped and turned to face me. I was shocked to find that she was upset with me. "We all knew you were going to hurt Gregory, I believe. We all knew it was wrong when he returned and later some others brought it to us, but we deluded ourselves into believing it was pure love and convinced ourselves it was correct. It appears that some of the more outspoken individuals, such as my spouse, with regret," she said, "they were easing their own guilty conscience by telling the rest of us you would be all right to hide their own cheating." I glanced at the shattered pair. Mark was unable to look any of us in the eyes, and Lena was about to lose it. "And now," was all I had to ask. Lena laughed bitterly. "Let's just say that our crows are returning to their roost. We have severely wounded someone we loved, and my marriage is in serious jeopardy. I'm not sure if it will endure." I turned to face Mark, who remained silent despite my knowing he was paying attention. They were wrong if they thought that using their guilt would make me feel bad for them. "I can't say that I am not pleased to hear you're both hurting," I replied gently. "However, the fact remains that as the managing partner of Other Accounting, I have made the decision based on activities in the last few months that it is not in the interest of this business to continue looking after your company." I saw the sag in Mark's shoulders. "But," I replied. Mark gave me a hopeful expression as he gazed up at me, saying, "I do have some mercy. I can suggest 3 companies that would be willing to take on your account, even though you don't deserve it." James is holding a list of their information. James moved a sheet of paper over the surface. "If you're interested, just let James know, and we can send your previous year's financials to any of them." Mark's eyes went from sparkles to a lifeless expression. "That's it?" Mark inquired. "A suggestion. Are you truly done with us?" "Yes," I answered, shook my head. "By endorsing Jillian and the guy and uttering phrases like true love and me to be together without any regret, you chose to ruin my marriage. Even as you did this, you were grinning, giggling, and making jokes. This is cause and effect, or causality. I tamper with your life, and you mess with mine." After that, I stood up and left the room without saying goodbye. James informed me that they had selected a candidate a short while later, and that once Mark and Lena signed the necessary paperwork, he would provide the information to me in a few days. Approximately 3 more clients, Jillian's classmates who had encouraged her in her adultery, were shown the identical image over the course of the following month, at which point they realized I would no longer be doing business with them. Interestingly, even though I lost 4 clients, I managed to acquire 6 more. Others in the class who wanted to be kind to me by giving me work and who in no way condoned what had happened. I didn't say no, even though it wasn't like Other Accounting needed the work. September arrived, along with the formal divorce decree. August had transformed into September. I had returned to the renovated home at this point. My arms stopped hurting and were completely cured. I would not miss the itching sensation of the bandages, even though I could admit to myself that I missed looking like a boxer, along with missing a call from Jillian, which I never answered. I also received a text message that day, which I did read. It said just that, "Goodbye, Gregory. I'm sorry." I wasn't sure how to react. Was she sorry about what she'd done? In the months that had passed since the night at the club, the hurt of betrayal had lessened. Yes, I was still irritated and furious. However, I was a rational person, and Jillian wasn't the right fit for me if she could so casually leave me after having an affair. Colleen and a few of the coworkers gathered that weekend and showed up at my house without permission for a get-together barbecue with friends and relatives. To put it mildly, I was taken aback to discover that on that Saturday afternoon, I must have given hugs to over 24 people, and I had the opportunity to interact with just approximately 1/3 of them. I was never alone all afternoon. Whether it was Colleen, James, Sherry, or any of my dozen staff members, there was always someone present. James was working the barbecue at one point, and I was sitting there with a beer in one hand. I was crying while Sherry sat with me, watching a bunch of little kids in my garden playing touch football. Seeing them hit me hard because I realized then that Jillian and I would not have the children we had talked about for the previous few years. Sherry sat back down next to me, and I felt a gentle kiss on my cheek, glaring at her. She caressed my cheek and took hold of my hand. I know what you're thinking, Greg, but life will return. Avoid isolating yourself. Many individuals, some of whom you may not know, as well as some you do, are here to support you this afternoon. Everyone here, including your family, friends, and coworkers, is aware that we are here to help you. The things they did to you weren't fair. They also caused pain to James and myself, but that was merely a repercussion, so please know that we are here to support you. Sherry gave me a few minutes of hugging since she knew I was crying. James was there too, looking at me with compassion, a minute after I felt a hand on my shoulder. Colleen and a few other staff members gave each other another embrace after that. If I was a complete mess for the majority of the afternoon, I never felt uncomfortable even if I occasionally felt eyes on me or gentle touches informing me that I had support. I felt much better at work the following week. The staff observed me grinning and even cracking a few jokes with one another, which hadn't happened in a long time. I thanked everyone for coming to the weekly staff meeting and supporting me in confronting James and Colleen. I also gave Sherry special recognition for proving to me that there is hope after treachery. We also added 3 new clients that week, 2 of whom were very big corporations. It seemed that one of our more senior clients had recommended us. We were advised that the corporations require some external detailed financial investigation. We divided up the duty, and I chose to take on the forensic audit for one of the companies for the first time since Jillian left. We had a 3-month period to deliver outcomes, therefore we worked hard and completed the task on time. I established a nightly regimen that included making dinner and working out. I was aware that I might immerse myself in my work, or worse, in alcohol. But I wanted to overcome betrayal and rediscover life. I had hoped to be more than just another divorce statistic because of Colleen and the team. 2 weeks had passed since the BBQ on a Thursday night. The doorbell rang as I was finishing up a peaceful meal of lamb cutlets and gnocchi with an apple mustard reduction. I threw the tea towel I was using on the table as I was making my way to the front door after finishing my meal. When I opened the door, I was astounded to see a stunning blonde woman who was slightly over 5 feet tall. She appeared anxious, but before I could say hello and inquire about how I could help, she stepped into me, grabbed my shirt, and planted a kiss on me. Although her lips were soft and sensitive, for a little minute I was shocked. Her breath had a hint of mint, and before I realized it, I was kissing her again. Her arms encircled my waist, and I instinctively drew her close to me, maintaining a constant kiss. I'm not sure how long we kissed. It might have been 30 seconds or 30 minutes, but I do know that it felt fantastic. I was shocked to see a glimmer of tears in the stranger's eyes as we separated, having just finished kissing her. But once again, she stepped back and slapped me before I could say hi. It was more of a gesture than a forceful smack, but it was still a slap. I knew it was evident on my face as I stood there in disbelief. The woman had a sorrowful but compassionate expression on her face. The woman apologized, saying, "It wasn't a great way to say hello, Gregory." Like a young Helen Mirren, her voice was seductive but also demanding and strong. Observing her, I pondered over her identity. I answered, "Yeah, sure," without answering the question. The female grinned. "Rebecca," was all she said. Again, "Rebecca," I said. Neither of us said anything for a brief while. "So, Rebecca," I murmured, casting a doubtful glance at her. What brings you to my door this evening?" With a sly smile, "You," was all she said. "I suppose I should gather that based upon your greeting, but why are you here to see me?" With a smile tugging at the corner of my lips, I questioned. She resembled a small kitten having fun with a brand new toy. "Because you need me to be here," she said, grinning in return. "Really?" I answered. "Tell me, then, why I need you." I mean, I have no problem kissing a stunning woman as much as the next guy, but to slap her after such a wonderful kiss when I have no idea how I hurt her is confusing. I could see joy now in her eyes. She asked, "You think I'm beautiful?" Nodding, I said, "And gorgeous," saying it again. Rebecca smiled broadly, and even though I had only known her for 5 minutes, I was already in love. "Thank you, Gregory." She flushed and looked down after saying that. She had on a dark blue sundress that looked stunning against her fair hair. I got a peek of some toned calves with a nose that was adorable, high cheekbones, big blue eyes, and a face that was classically attractive. Any man would turn his head to look at her as she passed. Smelling the air, she questioned, "Something smells nice." I let out a satisfied sigh, finished the game, and unlocked the door to let the odd woman who seemed to be waiting for me inside. I wanted to know what she wanted, and I was fairly certain that she was harmless. After a brief conversation about nothing, I led her into the kitchen, got out a glass, gave her a quick glance, and then poured her a nice Shiraz that I had been enjoying lately. Her well-groomed eyebrow lifted as I set the glass down in front of her and moved back into the kitchen to finish making dinner. Luckily, I was in the office making leftovers for lunch the following day, so I quickly grabbed another dish and made Rebecca a meal. She did not drink the wine, she just watched me get ready. I set down a dish in front of her, another on the chair next to her, and came back later with utensils and a glass of wine for myself, but not before turning down the lights in the kitchen. Rebecca laughed when the room's lighting decreased. She said idly, "Our first date and you ordered for me." "Well, a woman likes a man who knows what she wants," I responded. Then Rebecca laughed and flung back her head. Then she lifted her glass and gave me a direct look. She toasted me, saying, "To Gregory Other," demonstrating that even wounded, he still knows how to treat a lady. Grinning, we sipped our wine and clicked our glasses. Rebecca was the first to sample the food, and I saw her eyes widen as she tore off a good chunk of beef and dipped it into the sauce reduction. "Gregory, this is amazing, thank you." I followed suit with a nod. It was excellent. I adjusted the sauce's sweetness and acidity to perfection, and it tasted precisely like Rebecca's. "Okay, Rebecca, please stop playing games. What's going on here, and who are you?" I inquired. She took another sip of wine, another bite, and then she became anxious. "Let me start by saying thanks, Gregory. You handled what I did there in a lot of different ways, and you did it with such grace. Before I knocked, I stood outside your door for over 20 minutes. I sipped my own wine and nodded. As for me, we've already had a few encounters. I am the niece of Colleen." She gave that some thought, and then a thought flashed in my mind. "Ah, Rebecca, yes, sorry, but you look so different than last time we met," I responded. She grinned, sadness there, but it was an old hurt. Rebecca was someone I had met before, but she didn't look like her at all. She was in a goth phase at the time, and Colleen had warned me not to follow this boy around. When we initially met, she had multiple piercings in her ears and nose, and her hair had been dyed jet black. She also wore clothes and boots that would have made any goth proud, along with an abundance of pale makeup. She told me I was coming out of a self-destructive time, but she was grinning. It had been almost a month since my breakup with my lover. I was just lost, not sure who I was yet. After speaking with my mother, Aunt Colleen brought me into the office to try to get me a change of scenery. She explained herself, and I nodded, taking another sip of wine and remembering the meeting. Over the course of a month, she had visited the workplace roughly 5 times, always wearing all black. Her formerly gorgeous blonde hair was jet black, as I remembered. She also had a variety of facial piercings in various locations that were no longer present, along with black lipstick and eyeliner. He was cheating on me with 3 people, 2 girls and a guy. She pulled me out of the memory with her direct explanation. My wine nearly escaped my lips. "What?" I said, skeptically. She looked down at her drink and answered, "Yeah, remembering the experiences." We returned to the other guy's apartment after leaving the club high. My comment: "The ending of this long one is coming soon. Subscribe if you want to catch OP's ending, and we will see how he deals with his wife in the part 2 ending. Do you think he will accept all of this, or stand up for himself? See you in the ending."